I'll be beginning this screencast with the First Continental Congress, so if you have already gotten to this part of the notes, please fast forward to where your class left off, okay? Just take note of that. So, the coercive acts, as you'll have in your outline already under the First Continental Congress, the coercive acts just really upset the colonists even further. So they decide it is time to unite against Britain by forming another all-colony assembly known as the First Continental Congress. Again, you should have this note in your outline already. So they're going to form another colonial assembly called the First Continental Congress. At the First Continental Congress, the colonists issue another list of grievances. They ask for all the taxes to be repealed, and then they make two threats to England. They threaten to boycott all British goods, and they also threaten to stop all exports to the British. It's basically threatening, one, to hurt them financially by not purchasing any goods being shipped from England, and then two, they're threatening they will no longer export goods to England. But at this point, they still do hope for compromise. But Britain does not want to compromise. They are just going to increase the number of military forces sent to the colonies. Alright, now there is a separate group in the colonies that we haven't really talked about yet, and that's the Loyalists. Not all of the colonists supported the Patriot cause. Some remained loyal to England, and we call this group the Loyalists, also known as the Tories, as you see on your PowerPoint. And there's many different reasons why some remained loyal to England, and you don't have to know all of the different reasons, but just for your own benefit, I mean, some feared the crazy Sons of Liberty, thinking they were a little too extreme. Some just feared what kind of chaos the revolution could bring. But in the end, many do remain loyal to England. And so the Patriots, there's a struggle between the Patriots and the British, but there's also a struggle between the Patriots and the Loyalists. Now, a very important event occurs between the First and Second Continental Congresses, and that is the battle at Lexington and Concord. The Patriots begin raising defensive forces in order to protect themselves against the British. And we called this defensive force the Minutemen. That spelling is on the PowerPoint. And I think they're called Minutemen, just on the side. They're called Minutemen because they had to be ready at a minute's notice. Now, we know things are particularly bad in Massachusetts. Massachusetts was declared to be in a state of rebellion. So there was an order for all the British soldiers to capture colonial leaders and supplies in different Massachusetts cities. And so in April of 1775, which is just for perspective, the British troops are sent to Concord, Massachusetts to do this. They're sent to capture military supplies from the colonists. So Concord and Lexington, y'all, they're just two towns. They're the name of two towns in Massachusetts. They're right outside of Boston. Okay, so the British soldiers are on their way to Concord to capture the colonial leaders and supplies, and this is where we have a very famous ride take place, a ride of warning, if you will, that the British are coming, the British are coming. And so this is where many of you know the story of Paul Revere. But I do want you to know that 3 patriots rode to warn the colonists that the British troops were coming to attack. And the 3 names are on my PowerPoint, but that is Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott. And so Paul Revere gets all the credit, because the song is after him, the poem is after him, but Paul Revere is not the only rider that night. But these 3 men ride into the cities to warn that the British are on their way to attack Concord. Just a few pictures here for you. You don't have to write anything down about this, but Paul Revere is actually a well-known patriot, and the Old North Church, which is in Boston, is where he was assigned to hang lanterns, signaling whether or not the British were coming to attack. 1 lantern if by land, 2 lanterns if by sea. And so here's the outside gate of that church. There's even a museum dedicated to where his old home was. And then, of course, the very large Paul Revere statue that sits next to the church. So the Bostonians really, really like Paul Revere. So these men did warn that the British troops were coming to attack. So the colonial Minutemen meet the British troops at Lexington, which is just in a town kind of on the way to Concord. Okay, so they kind of meet them in the middle. And the colonial troops were outnumbered here, so they had to retreat back towards Concord. So there really wasn't fighting that took place at Lexington. But at Concord, the colonists were much more prepared. So the Minutemen attacked. Fighting had begun. So independence hasn't been declared yet, but fighting has started. So this will lead us to, here's a picture of that field where the Minutemen would have attacked the British soldiers. Okay, this is going to lead us to our last section of notes I want to take today, the Second Continental Congress. We see that the Second Continental Congress will meet in Philadelphia in 1775. And there's a battle I want to talk about really quickly because it does have some importance to this Congress, and that's the battle at Bunker Hill. The battle is known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, even though most of the fighting took place at Breed's Hill. And I have that on the slide. Hold on one second, girls. Okay, sorry I had to pause that in the middle. The cross-country team is practicing outside, and they were making me very distracted. So, and shout out to Elise as she asked me to say that. She was one of the ones making all the noise. Okay, fasting forward here, okay? The battle is known as Bunker Hill, even though most of the fighting took place at Breed's Hill. This was a British victory, but technically it was a moral victory for the colonists. And the reason was because the British suffered many casualties, so the colonists really proved they could hold their own against England, even though they don't even have an army yet, an official army. But the reason this battle is so important is because after this battle, and per the Second Continental Congress's approval, they will create an official Continental Army. And of course, they named Mr. George Washington as their leader. And for our last note, this will lead us to the Continental Congress's, the Second Continental Congress's last attempt at making peace with Britain, and that's known as the Olive Branch Petition. In the summer of 1775, Congress drafts the Olive Branch Petition. The colonists were asking the king for peace. They were pleading with King George III, hoping that they could appeal to him and that he would repeal all of the recent oppressive legislation and taxes, and that he would remove all the British troops from the colonies. So they ask him all these things, and they pledge their loyalty to him. But King George does not respond well to this. He does not accept their petition, and he declares that all of the colonies were in a state of rebellion. And he even hired about 30,000 German mercenaries or hired soldiers to be sent to the colonies. And they're eventually going to be the group that helps the British fight the colonists. Okay? Alright, so that is all the notes I want to talk about today. We're going to get into the Declaration of Independence tomorrow. Okay, so make sure you re-listen to this. I know I talked kind of quickly at the end because the cross-country team is not quiet still, so I'm trying to just get through it. But hopefully you heard it. Write down any questions you have, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.